Why did everyone go silent when the Admiral spoke her name? It started as a night meant for laughter. The officers' lounge buzzed with the low hum of stories and the sharp crack of glass against wood. Cigarette smoke hung like a fog over old medals and older memories. Admiral Harlan sat in the center, the man everyone deferred to, the one whose name carried the weight of 3 wars and 4 decades of command. He was iron-spined, sharp-tongued, the kind of leader who'd seen too much to be impressed by anything anymore. Almost anything. Across the room by the far wall sat a woman he hadn't noticed before. Civilian clothes, hair tied back loosely, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The kind of quiet presence that disappears in plain sight until something in the way she moved caught the corner of his attention. Her posture, straight, still, not rigid like parade discipline but balanced, the kind of stillness learned in sniper hides, not classrooms. Harlan smirked, leaning back. "You there?" he called out, his voice carrying above the chatter. "You've been quiet all night. What's your call sign?" The question was meant as a tease, the kind a man throws out when he's certain of his place, when he assumes the world still spins around him. Laughter rippled through the room. A few lieutenants smirked, watching the old man amuse himself. She didn't answer at first, just looked up, slow and deliberate, as though she'd been pulled from a memory rather than a thought. When her gaze met his, the noise around them drained away. Her eyes weren't defiant, they weren't afraid either, they were calm. Then she spoke 2 words. "Iron Widow." The words landed like a round through glass. Someone laughed, nervous, uncertain. Another voice whispered, "No way." But Harlan's face told a different story. His smirk faltered, and for the first time in years the Admiral's hand shook. His whiskey glass slipped from his grip, shattering against the floor. He staggered back a step. What did you say?" She didn't blink. "You heard me." Every veteran in that room knew the name. Most thought it was a myth, a ghost story traded between operators, something whispered on deployment nights when the desert winds howled too loud to sleep. A sniper who vanished after Kandahar. The one they said went back for her team when everyone else had written them off. But the Admiral, he knew the truth. He remembered the after-action report, redacted pages, blood-soaked paragraphs, an entire section stamped classified, level black. He remembered the photos, the cracked helmet, the burning valley, the bodies. And he remembered the line at the bottom. Operator presumed KIA, body unrecovered. Now that ghost was standing in front of him, alive, breathing and calm as a drawn rifle. He tried to speak, but his throat closed around the words. All those years of authority, of command, meant nothing now. He wasn't an admiral anymore, just a man facing the echo of his own past decisions. Her expression softened slightly, almost merciful. "Relax, Admiral," she said quietly. "I didn't come here for you." But that didn't ease the tremor in his hands, because deep down, Harlan knew she should have. The whispers began to spread through the room. "Is she real?" someone muttered. "I thought Iron Widow was a story." They said she took out an entire ridge alone. Stories, half-remembered, exaggerated through years of retelling, all circling back to one woman who had supposedly died in a mission gone wrong, one that had never officially existed. But the truth wasn't glorious, it never was. That night in Kandahar wasn't about heroics. It was about survival, the kind of survival that leaves scars deeper than any bullet wound. And as Harlan stared at her, the memory of that mission replayed in his mind like an old tape he couldn't shut off. He saw the flash reports, a unit ambushed in the valley, extraction called off due to sandstorm interference. A sniper team pinned down. One refused to retreat. Sorry. She had stayed behind while the others were lifted out, stayed to cover the wounded, to hold the line until reinforcements broke through. By the time the Hellos returned, the ridge was a smoking ruin. Only one signal had come through the radio before it went dark. "Target grid secure, don't come back for me." They never found her body. But some things don't stay buried. Back in the lounge, the silence thickened. A few of the younger officers rose slowly, unsure if this was real or performance. But the veterans, the ones who had seen what the reports never wrote, they stood without hesitation. One by one. A quiet salute not to rank, but to something older than command respect. She didn't move, just nodded once almost imperceptibly, the kind of acknowledgement that says thank you without words. Then she turned toward the bar, poured herself a drink and said softly, "You should sit, Admiral. You're shaking." Harlan sank into his chair, the weight of his years pressing down harder than ever. "What happened to you?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse. She took a sip, her gaze distant. "What always happens," she said. "We did our job, the world moved on." He leaned forward. "You were reported KIA. How the hell are you sitting here?" Her fingers tightened around the glass. For a moment, the mask slipped, a flicker of something raw underneath the composure. "Because sometimes," she said quietly, "dying is easier than coming back." The Admiral said nothing. The air in the room felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. She set the glass down carefully, the click echoing through the silence. "You remember Operation Veil?" Harlan's jaw clenched. That mission was sealed. "Not to the people who lived it," she said. "You left us there." Her voice didn't rise. She didn't need to shout. The restraint in her tone carried more power than any scream could. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The old man looked small. "I followed the orders I was given," he said finally. "I know," she replied, "and I followed mine." She stood, her shadow stretching across the floorboards, calm, poised, unbroken. "But orders don't bury the nightmares, Admiral. They just write them down as statistics." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Wait," he said. "What did they call you before that, before the call sign?" She looked back over her shoulder. "Does it matter?" "It does to me." For the first time, something almost like pain flickered in her expression. "It used to be Evelyn," she said quietly, "but that name didn't survive Kandahar." Then she walked toward the door, the eyes of every man in the room following her, not out of curiosity but reverence. No one spoke until the door closed behind her. And even then the silence stayed. Harlan sat there long after the others drifted away, his fingers tracing the wet ring her glass had left on the table. He whispered to himself, she was right, some debts never stay buried. Outside, Evelyn, Iron Widow, paused under the cold night air. The base lights glowed faintly against the fog. Somewhere beyond those gates lay the memories she had tried to outrun, the faces, the screams, the impossible choices. She lit a cigarette, the flame trembling slightly in the wind. Her hands bore faint scars, half-healed burns, reminders of a fire that hadn't gone out inside her. A group of recruits passed by, whispering her name, unsure if they were looking at a legend or a ghost. She didn't turn, didn't need to. She learned long ago that ghosts don't explain themselves. In the distance, the sound of a helicopter thumped faintly across the horizon, rhythmic, haunting. She closed her eyes for a moment. For her, that sound wasn't transport, it was memory. There was a time she trusted that sound, that it meant safety, extraction, hope. Now it only meant reminders. She exhaled, smoke curling up like a whisper. "Some debts," she murmured, "never let you rest." Behind her, through the window, Harlan watched, older, smaller, perhaps even remorseful. He knew that look. He'd seen it in mirrors, in the eyes of dying men, in every face that ever came back from something they shouldn't have survived. He finally understood why she had returned. Not for revenge, not even for closure. For truth. Because the truth doesn't fade with time, it waits. And when it rises, it doesn't ask permission. It just arrives. Evelyn flicked her cigarette to the ground, the ember dying against the pavement. Then she walked into the darkness beyond the lights, shoulders squared, steps measured. The night swallowed her whole. And for the first time in years, the Admiral whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for the strength to face what still remained. Because somewhere out there, the Iron Widow had risen again. And legends, the real kind, never die. Why did the desert still call her name after all these years? Evelyn used to think silence was peace. Now she knew silence was memory, just louder. The desert wind carried it back to her in fragments. Gunfire, breath, the weight of the rifle in her hands, the smell of burnt oil and blood. That was Kandahar. That was Operation Veil. It began with a promise, one she never meant to break. They told her it would be a recon job, in and out. But there's no such thing as simple in a war that's already lost its meaning. The team was small, 7 operators, 1 embedded medic, 1 sniper. Sorry. They called her Eve then. Not Iron Widow, not Ghost, just Eve. The one who could hit a moving target at 1,200 meters, while her heart rate stayed below 80. She'd been trained to wait, to breathe, to disappear. But no one trained her for what waiting does to the soul. She remembered the night before deployment. The airbase was quiet except for the hum of generators. Sergeant Cole had been cleaning his weapon on a crate, humming a country song so old it didn't belong to any century. "You ever think about what happens after?" he'd asked. She looked at him. After what? After all this, when the shooting stops. She'd smiled faintly. It never stops, it just moves somewhere else. He'd laughed, not realizing she meant it. Operation Veil was supposed to be a simple intercept. A convoy carrying stolen ordnance, missiles, encrypted drives, rumored to be headed toward a border stronghold. Their orders: mark the location, confirm presence, exfil. No engagement. No heroics. No witnesses. But plans crumble faster than walls in Kandahar. They moved at dusk. The light over the valley turned everything copper, the sand, the sky, even their faces. Evelyn moved last in the column, scanning the horizon through her scope. The wind was steady, 7 miles from the east, perfect shot weather. She felt calm, too calm. Then the radio hissed. Static, then a voice, panic slicing through the channel. Ambush, grid 715 Charlie. The rest dissolved in noise. Bullets cut through the air like hornets. The first man went down before anyone saw where it came from. Cole dragged him behind a burned-out truck while the rest scrambled for cover. Evelyn dropped flat, rifle swinging to the ridge. She saw the muzzle flashes, counted. 1, 2, 3 positions, maybe more. She squeezed the trigger, once, twice, 3 times. 3 flashes went dark. But there were too many. They were surrounded. Hours blurred. The sandstorm came in heavy, grinding metal against skin. The comms went dead. Their extraction birds circled somewhere beyond the clouds, unable to find them. The medic Lion was hit in the leg, bleeding out fast. Cole pressed a hand to the wound. "You hold on, Doc," he kept saying, though his own shoulder was torn open. Evelyn checked the sat beacon. No signal. She could feel the tremor of artillery rolling closer, the rhythm of a death march approaching. And still she kept shooting. When her rifle jammed, she switched to sidearm. When the sidearm ran dry, she picked up another. She moved like a ghost, like instinct itself, until there was nothing left to move with but will. At one point, Cole looked up from the dirt, eyes wide, face pale. "Eve, the bird's leaving. They said they can't wait, storm's closing." She didn't answer, just kept firing. He shouted again, desperation cracking his voice. "Eve, we gotta go." She looked at him, then at Lion, barely conscious, whispering something about his daughter. And she made a choice. "Go," she said. "What?" "You heard me, get them out." He hesitated, "Not without you." Her gaze was steel. That's an order. He understood then. The kind of understanding soldiers never forget and never forgive. Cole dragged Lion toward the evac zone. The Hello's lights flickered through the storm, barely visible. The last thing he saw before the hatch closed was Eve turning back toward the ridge, kneeling into position, rifle steady against her shoulder. Then the storm swallowed her whole. The after-action report would later call it tactical containment. The truth was simpler. She stayed behind to make sure her team lived. By dawn, the ridge was silent. Her last recorded shot came 47 minutes after extraction. Then nothing. No signal, no body, no trace. Just a call sign, whispered in the static. Target grid secure, don't come back for me. Years later, she would still wake to that moment. The sound of rotors fatting, the smell of dust and cordite, the taste of blood in her mouth. Sometimes she wondered if she actually died there, and everything since was some cruel echo. She'd been found weeks later by a patrol, half-conscious, dehydrated, a bullet lodged near her ribs. She never told them her name. She didn't have to. The way she carried herself said everything. They listed her as unidentified female operator. She let them. Better a ghost than a memory they could exploit. When she healed enough to walk, she disappeared. No discharge, no ceremony, just absence. The world assumed she was gone, and she let it. Now, sitting in a cheap hotel room near the base years later, Evelyn opened an old steel case. Inside lay the cracked helmet, the one they said they found buried under the sand. Her reflection stared back through the fracture line that ran across the visor. She ran her thumb over the etched letters near the side. Iron Widow. It hadn't been her choice. The name was given by those who lived because she didn't come home. She should have hated it. But part of her needed it, needed something to hold on to, even if it was just a name carved out of grief. Her phone buzzed, a message, unknown number. We need to talk, old ghosts. She knew who it was before opening the thread. Harlan. For a long minute she stared at the screen, then typed a single word. Tomorrow. When she arrived at the base gate the next morning, the guards hesitated. No uniform, no rank, just a woman carrying a duffel bag and a look that made even armed men step aside. Inside the bag wasn't much, just her old rifle, disassembled and cleaned, and a small folded flag she'd never been given officially. The admiral was waiting by the hangar. He looked smaller in daylight, stripped of ceremony. I didn't think you'd come, he said. I almost didn't. He gestured toward a jeep. There's something you should see. They drove in silence through the empty range outside the base. The landscape was bare, scorched by years of drills and forgotten tests. Finally, he stopped near a fenced-off lot. Rows of names carved into metal plates stood against the wind, operators lost in unacknowledged missions. She walked toward them slowly, reading the call signs. Then she saw it, her own, halfway down the third panel. Iron Widow KIA. Her throat tightened. You made me a grave. He didn't answer. You left me there, she said quietly. He flinched like the words had weight. I had to follow protocol, the storm. She turned, don't justify it. The wind tore through the space between them. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, he said, they're rewriting the record. They want to know what really happened that night. And you want me to tell them. You're the only one who can. She looked past him, toward the horizon where the sun burned low. What difference does it make now? Maybe none, maybe everything. Her gaze lingered on the plates again. There were names she recognized, Cole, Lion, both killed in later deployments. Her chest tightened. The living always carried the dead of the dead. She set the duffel down and opened it. The rifle pieces gleamed faintly. You still shoot? Harlan asked. She assembled the weapon with practiced ease. Only when I have to. He watched her for a long time, then said, "You could come back, you know. Instructor, advisor, something clean." She smiled, faint and bitter. Clean doesn't exist. That night she stood alone on the firing range. The world around her was quiet except for the wind brushing through the empty targets. She loaded one round, aimed and fired. The bullet struck dead center. Still she felt nothing. She whispered into the dark, "You told me to hold the line, Cole. I'm still holding." The echo came back to her softer, almost kind. For the first time in years, she let herself breathe. Not as Iron Widow. Not as legend. Just as Evelyn. Because under all the noise and medals and myths, that was who she had always been, a woman who refused to let others die alone. The next morning she found a letter slid under her door. No name, just a seal. Inside, one line handwritten. "Some debts can't be paid, only carried." She folded it once, tucked it into her pocket, and stepped outside into the rising sun. Somewhere behind her, the world kept its story straight, polished for ceremony. But truth lived in the quiet spaces, in the breath between shots, in the pause between orders, in the choice to stay when everyone else runs. And in that truth, Iron Widow was still alive. Because courage doesn't vanish. It waits. And when the world forgets, it whispers again through the desert wind. Why did the ghosts start moving again after so many years of quiet? Evelyn thought she had buried them all, the faces, the gunfire, the desert. But ghosts don't stay where you put them. They wait for weakness, for the first crack in your peace, and then they pour through. It began the morning she returned to town. Small coastal base, fog rolling in off the water, gulls cutting through the gray. She hadn't been near an ocean in years. She'd forgotten how it sounded, soft, endless, indifferent. She rented a small room above a mechanic's shop. The smell of oil clung to everything. The kind of place nobody looked twice at you. Perfect for someone who'd spent a lifetime learning how not to be seen. She told herself she was only staying long enough to give Harlan what he wanted, a debrief, a few hours of talking, a signature. Then she'd vanish again. But she hadn't opened her bag yet. Inside, beneath the folded fatigues and the cracked helmet, lay the envelope he'd given her before she left the memorial field. "It's all that's left of the mission," he'd said. "You deserve to know." She wanted to throw it away. She didn't. Now, sitting in the dim room, she tore the flap open. Inside were photographs, satellite stills, and a report stamped DCLSSFID for review only. She scanned the first page. Words she'd seen before: engagement compromised, hostile interference, loss of comms. But then something else. A section blacked out before now visible. Interception confirmed. Objective payload contained experimental drone control hardware. Authorization for engagement pre-approved by Command Group Echo. Team Vale instructed to delay extraction until recovery confirmed. Her stomach turned. She read it twice, then a third time. Delay extraction. Not extraction failed. Not lost in storm. They were told to stay. She felt the weight of the rifle sling across her shoulder even though it wasn't there. The heat of that valley came rushing back. The voices screaming over the comms. The hello lifting. They hadn't been abandoned by chance. They'd been ordered to die buying time for a drone prototype no one ever mentioned again. Her chest tightened, the air growing thin. She dropped the file and pressed her palms against the table. "God," she whispered, "they used us." That evening she walked down to the docks. The sea was restless, black beneath the moonlight. Her reflection on the water looked younger than she felt, maybe, because she still hadn't learned how to forgive the person staring back. She remembered Cole's laugh, the medic's trembling hands, the radio static. "We can't hold much longer." all of it orchestrated for a secret that didn't even matter now. She thought of Harlan, the way he'd looked at her, not surprised to see her alive, but afraid of what she might remember. Maybe he already knew. She didn't go back to the base right away. Instead, she drove to the city 2 hours south, an old habit of following the threads before they could be cut. The Pentagon report listed the authorization signature of 1LT, Commander S. Rains. She knew that name. Back then, Rains had been the liaison between field teams and Echo Command, a strategist with a reputation for clean paperwork and cold choices. She found him teaching tactics at a private security firm, a man reinvented by peacetime. When she entered the lecture hall, he didn't recognize her at first. Why would he? To him, she'd been a file, a casualty. But when she said the words Operation Veil, the color drained from his face. He dismissed the class, waited until the room emptied. "Then you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," she said. He looked at her long, measuring. "You're supposed to be dead." "Guess we both disappoint people." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "What do you want, Evelyn?" "The truth." He hesitated, then gestured toward his office. She followed. Inside, he poured whiskey into 2 glasses, but only drank from one. "You think I wanted that mission to go the way it did," he said. "It wasn't my call. Your signature says otherwise." Orders came from above Echo, black-level authorization. I didn't even see the full op sheet. We were told it was containment, enemy tech retrieval, non-personnel priority. "Non-personnel," she repeated. "That was my team." Rains looked away. "You were ghosts on paper, unofficial tasking, no record of presence. If it went south, no one could admit it existed. That's how Black Ops works, widow. You know that." "I also know loyalty isn't supposed to be disposable." He met her eyes. There was something there, guilt maybe, regret. "What do you want from me? An apology?" "I want names." He hesitated again. "You really want to open that box?" "I already did." He nodded slowly, then turned to his computer. A few keystrokes, a secured drive opened. Lines of text filled the screen. He slid a small drive across the table. "Everything I have. Command logs, approval signatures, drone data. You didn't hear it from me." "Why help me?" she asked. He exhaled. "Because I've been hearing that ridge in my sleep for 15 years. Outside, the city lights looked like stars fallen too low." She slipped the drive into her pocket, but her mind was racing. Names, dates, coordinates. Too many ghosts connected by too clean a pattern. This wasn't an accident. It was a cover. And Harlan was in it. She remembered the way his voice had cracked when he saw her, the trembling hand, the almost rehearsed shock. He hadn't been surprised she was alive. He'd been afraid of what her survival meant. Back in her room, she set up the laptop and opened the files. Video logs, intercepted orders, surveillance images. Then one folder marked post-veil analysis. Inside were casualty reports. Cole, Lyon, every survivor dead within 2 years. Accidents, reassignment incidents, training malfunctions. All except one, her. A chill crawled down her spine. This wasn't random, it was cleanup. She leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. "What did you do, Harlan?" she whispered. The knock came a few seconds later. 3 short taps. A pause. 2 more. Old field signal, friendly. She reached for the pistol on the nightstand, staying quiet. "Eve," a voice said softly, "it's me." She froze. No one called her that anymore. She opened the door. A man stood there, older, worn one arm in a sling. "Cole," she breathed. He smiled faintly, in the flesh mostly. Her throat closed. "You were listed." "Yeah, I know." He stepped in, shut the door behind him. "I stayed that way for a reason." She stared, half disbelieving. You let them think you were dead. They were already killing everyone else who was. I figured I'd make their job easier. He dropped a battered notebook on the table. I've been following the trail. They never stopped covering it up. You finding that file just lit the fuse. She sank into the chair. You could have told me. He shrugged. Didn't know you were still breathing till a month ago. Word gets around the quiet channels. He poured himself coffee from the pot she hadn't touched all day. You planning to burn them down? I just want the truth out. He chuckled darkly. Same thing. They spent the night going through the files. Each page told the same story: deliberate isolation, redirected air support, falsified loss reports. And every approval trail led to one office, Admiral Harlan. By dawn, the room looked like a war map, papers spread across the floor, lines of string connecting names and dates. Cole rubbed his temple. We could leak it. To who? No one touches black-level leaks. They'll bury it before it breathes. So what then? She looked up. We make them face it. That afternoon, she walked back through the base gates. Guards saluted automatically, though none knew why. Harlan was in his office, reading something on a tablet when she entered. He looked up startled, then wary. I wasn't expecting. Save it. She dropped the flash drive on his desk. It clattered like a bullet. He didn't move. What's that? Your conscience, she said. He opened it, scrolled, face draining as the files unfolded. The orders, the signatures, his own name authorizing delay extraction. He swallowed hard. You don't understand what it was like then. Oh, I understand perfectly, she said. You traded people for a piece of metal and called it strategy. It saved lives later. It ended ours first. He pushed back from the desk, the old command reflex flaring. You think you're the only one who carries guilt. I've lived with this every day, every briefing, every night. She leaned forward, voice low. Then maybe it's time you stop living with it and start owning it. He met her gaze, defeated. What do you want me to do? Tell the truth. And if that destroys everything, then it was never worth keeping. Hours later, she stood outside again. The sky had begun to rain, rare for that coast. Drops traced down her face, indistinguishable from the tears she didn't realize she'd been holding. Cole joined her by the gate. You think he'll do it? I don't know, she said, but he's not the same man who laughed last week. Cole nodded slowly. Neither are you. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's the point. They watched the rain fall on the tarmac. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter lifted, the same low thrum as always, a reminder of where it all began. Evelyn closed her eyes. For the first time, the sound didn't make her flinch. Maybe ghosts could rest after all, not because the past was gone, but because someone finally looked it in the eye. That night she wrote in her journal, a habit she'd taken up since returning. Her handwriting was small, deliberate. Truth isn't revenge. It's the only burial ground that never lies. She paused, then added one more line. Sometimes the mission doesn't end when the shooting stops. Sometimes it begins when we finally listen. She closed the notebook and blew out the candle. Outside, the sea kept its rhythm, endless, steady cleansing. And in that rhythm, the Iron Widow began to sleep a little easier. Why do people fear the truth more than the bullet? Because a bullet kills once. The truth kills every day after. The inquiry hall was colder than any battlefield she'd stood on. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Polished brass nameplates lined the table. Behind them sat 3 officers in crisp uniform whose eyes betrayed nothing. Evelyn stood at attention, not in uniform but in presence. Harlan sat beside her, the lines on his face deeper than ever. For once, the Admiral looked like a man waiting for judgment instead of giving it. A recorder clicked on. A woman's voice, measured, clinical. Admiral Harlan, Operator Evelyn Shaw, this hearing concerns the events surrounding Operation Veil. All statements are under oath. Do you understand? Harlan nodded, understood. Evelyn's voice was low. Yes, ma'am. The panel chair leaned forward. Admiral, your authorization code appears on the mission order that delayed extraction. Explain. He hesitated. His hands trembled slightly. I signed it under directive from Command Group Echo, he said. The objective was the retrieval of classified drone technology. And the human cost. Harlan's voice cracked. We were told there would be time. We were wrong. The room stayed silent, except for the faint buzz of the lights. Evelyn watched the exchange without blinking. She promised herself she wouldn't speak unless asked, but truth has a way of forcing its own moment. When the chair turned to her, she was ready. Ms. Shaw, describe what happened after extraction was called. Her throat felt dry. We were under fire. Sandstorm cut comms. I ordered Sergeant Cole to evacuate the wounded. I stayed behind to hold the line. Why didn't you attempt self-extraction? Because someone had to buy time. The officer's pen paused mid-stroke. You believed the mission still mattered. Evelyn met his eyes. At that point the mission didn't matter, the people did. For a moment no one spoke. Then the chair asked quietly, when did you learn the order to delay was intentional? She looked toward Harlan. He lowered his gaze. 2 days ago, she said, from him. The panel exchanged glances. One leaned into his microphone. Admiral, is that correct? Harlan nodded. It is. The gavel struck once. This committee will recess for review. They stood. Officers filed out. The door closed with a heavy thud that sounded too much like a cell door locking. Evelyn leaned against the wall in the empty corridor. You didn't have to admit it, she said. Harlan sighed. Yes, I did. Why now? Because I saw what silence did to you. He rubbed a hand across his face. When you disappeared, I told myself it was mercy. That maybe the dead were luckier than the living. But every time I signed another report, your name stared back at me from the space it wasn't supposed to exist. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time she saw the man beneath the uniform. Not the commander, the human being terrified of his own memory. He whispered, I thought I could bury it, but you came back, and suddenly the dirt didn't look deep enough. Outside, rain had turned to a hard drizzle. Cole waited by the jeep, cigarette in hand. How'd it go? He asked. Could have been worse, she said. Could have been better. He smirked. That's military code for they're scared. They should be. She climbed into the passenger seat. As they pulled away, she looked out the window, rows of gray buildings blurring past, ghosts of order in a world built on disorder. Where do you think this ends? Cole asked. She didn't answer right away. Truth doesn't end, it just changes what survives. That night she stayed awake in her room, watching the rain streak across the glass. Sleep had become a stranger again. Every time she closed her eyes, the valley came back. The flashes, the storm, Cole's voice yelling over the comms. But something was different now. The guilt that used to choke her had shifted into something else. Purpose. She opened her notebook. On the first blank page she wrote, we fight wars to protect people from lies. But sometimes the war is the lie itself. She stared at the sentence until the ink dried. 2 days later, the inquiry reconvened. The hall was packed this time. Reporters, aides, silent onlookers pretending not to care. The panel chair announced, this hearing will record additional testimony and present preliminary findings. Evelyn sat rigid beside Harlan. Her palms rested on her knees, but her mind was elsewhere, counting heartbeats, the way she used to count seconds between sniper breaths. The chair spoke again. The committee finds sufficient evidence of procedural misconduct during Operation Veil. However, classified directives shield upper command from direct culpability. Admiral Harlan's authorization will be reviewed for disciplinary action. A murmur swept the room. Harlan closed his eyes. It was both a relief and a sentence. The chair turned to Evelyn. Ms. Shaw, due to your unofficial status, this hearing cannot formally recognize your service record. Nonetheless, the committee acknowledges your actions saved multiple lives. The words should have meant something. They didn't. She stood, permission to speak freely. Granted. She looked at the panel, at the cameras, at the faces trying to look neutral. I was trained to shoot straight, she said. Turns out honesty's harder to aim. You want the truth. Here it is. We keep pretending war is about right and wrong. It is. It's about who keeps breathing after the smoke clears. And sometimes the ones who live spend the rest of their lives wondering if they should have. The room fell still. She continued softly, don't write me a medal. Don't give me closure. Just stop building graves for people who were never meant to die. Then she turned and walked out. Reporters swarmed the steps outside. Flashbulbs popped like gunfire. Miss Shaw, are you Iron Widow? Do you blame the Admiral? Will you testify publicly? She kept walking, shoulders squared. Cole met her by the gate and opened the door. They'll spin it however they want, he said. I know. You still think it was worth it. She looked back at the building, where truth had just been filed under pending review. Yeah, she said, because lies don't heal. For weeks afterward, headlines came and went. Whispers about declassified missions, moral failures, forgotten heroes. Most people moved on, they always did. But inside the base, things shifted. Training manuals changed. Command procedures were quietly rewritten. A new plaque appeared in the memorial yard, no name, just a phrase. To those who held the line. Evelyn visited it once at dawn. No cameras, no witnesses, just her and the wind moving through the flags. She placed her cracked helmet beneath it and whispered, "You can rest now." Then she walked away. Weeks later, she found herself back near the docks. Cole was leaving for a civilian contract overseas. You could come, he said. Quiet job pays well. She shook her head. I think I've had enough of quiet jobs. He smiled. You ever figure out who you are without the rifle? She looked out at the gray water, still learning. He hugged her once, awkward, honest. Take care, widow. Don't call me that, she said softly. He grinned, then take care, Evelyn. She watched his car disappear into the fog. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like running. She walked along the pier until the boards creaked under her boots, then sat on the edge and let her legs dangle over the water. The sun was breaking through, a thin band of light cutting the horizon. She thought about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the confession, the silence afterward. And she realized something she'd never admitted, not even to herself. She wasn't angry anymore. Not at Harlan, not at the system. Just tired. And free. Later that morning, a small envelope arrived at her door. Inside, a letter in Harlan's handwriting. The review is over. They've relieved me of command. I don't blame them. I only hope the next ones remember the cost of every order. Thank you for reminding me. H. She folded the paper, placed it on the windowsill, and smiled faintly. The world would forget their names again soon enough. That was fine. Legends weren't built to be remembered. They were built to remind. She stepped outside, sunlight catching her face. The air smelled of salt and rain. For once, the silence didn't echo. It simply rested. That night, as the tide came in, she wrote one final line in her notebook. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. She closed the book. The wind lifted off the sea, carrying the words away like ashes. And for the first time since Kandahar, Evelyn Shaw, Iron Widow, slept without dreaming. Why did she answer the phone after promising never to again? It had been 6 quiet months. Enough time for the world to forget, enough for her to pretend she'd forgotten too. The sea had become her therapy. Every dawn she walked the pier barefoot, coffee in hand, listening to the gulls arguing over the tide. For the first time she belonged nowhere, and it felt like peace. Until the call. A number without a country code. She almost ignored it. But ghosts have good timing. She thumbed the screen. Yeah. A pause, then a voice she hadn't heard since the inquiry. Evelyn Shaw. Depends who's asking. This is Director Keller, Defense Intelligence Agency. Her pulse slowed, not sped. Training never leaves. I'm retired. I know, he said, but one of your old files is. That sentence undid months of stillness. The next morning, she sat across from Keller in a small diner near the Naval District. He looked like every career bureaucrat, neat haircut, calm voice, eyes that had seen too much and said too little. He slid a tablet across the table. Recognize this. The image showed a satellite photo of desert terrain. A ridge, a burnt-out convoy. Kandahar. Her throat tightened. That's mine. Not anymore, Keller said. A private contractor recovered remnants of the drone prototype from Operation Veil. They've been auctioning parts on the dark network. She blinked. Auctioning to who? He met her gaze. To anyone who can pay, and someone already did. He tapped the screen again. A logo appeared, faded, foreign, marked by a serpent circling a wing. Iron Raptor Group, ex-militia gone corporate. They've built a working model using that hardware, adaptive targeting, autonomous. She sat back. So you want me to stop them? He studied her. I want you to consult, advise a strike team, nothing official. She smirked, because official means paperwork. He didn't argue. She glanced out the window. Rain again. Always rain when old wars knock twice. What happens if I say no? Keller didn't look up. Then you live knowing what they built from your mission, from your people's deaths. Silence. Then she whispered, where? 48 hours later, she was on a cargo plane over the Indian Ocean. The team around her was young, too young. They called her ma'am, as if respect could erase inexperience. She didn't wear rank, she didn't need it. Cole wasn't there this time, too old, too damaged. He'd sent a message. Don't do it for them, do it for the ones who never came back. She kept hearing that line while checking her gear. The new team leader, Lieutenant Harper, tried to break the ice. Ma'am, they told us you were a legend. Then they told you a story, she said. He laughed nervously. You really think we can pull this off? She loaded a magazine. Ask me after we land. Their target, an abandoned airfield in western Yemen, now a fortress of Iron Raptor operatives. Inside, 2 prototype drones and the encrypted control unit, the same technology that had cost her team their lives 15 years ago. They dropped at midnight. No lights, just wind and breathing. Evelyn moved like she'd never left the field. The weight of the rifle felt like memory, reliable, unforgiving. She positioned herself on the ridge above the hangar. Harper's voice whispered through comms. All teams set, go on your mark. Her mark. Always her mark. She exhaled. 3-2 move. Shadows unfolded below, 4 units advancing across the runway. She tracked them through scope glass, heartbeat syncing with movement. Everything perfect, until a new signal appeared on her HUD. A second drone, active. Moving toward them. Contact east flank, she hissed. The drone's rotors whirred like a swarm of wasps. Machine-mounted .50s spun to life. Tracer rounds carved the night. She fired. One shot, center sensor sparks burst, the machine spiraled. But the noise blew their cover. Alarms howled. Floodlights bathed the field in white. Harper's voice cracked through the chaos. Abort, fall back. Evelyn watched as one of the rookies, Mendez, fell, leg torn open. No extraction bird yet. Same story, different war. She slid down the slope, grabbed Mendez under the arm. Move. But. No buts, you breathe, you move. They reached the cover of a supply truck as another volley tore through the sand. Harper's radio screamed static. Widow, we're pinned, they've got more. Hold your fire, I'm coming to you. She hadn't used the call sign in years. But it came out now like a reflex, the voice of someone who never really left that ridge in Kandahar. By the time the chopper arrived, half the compound was burning. They lifted out with a hard drive, but no drone intact. 2 men wounded, 1 missing. Harper sat slumped against the bulkhead, eyes wide, hands shaking. He looked at her. You knew this would happen. She said nothing. Because he was right. Back at base, Keller paced in the briefing room. You got the drive, he said. That's all that matters. She slammed her rifle on the table. That's what you said last time. He froze. Excuse me. You think this ends because you got your hardware back. They'll build another. Someone always does. He straightened, tone cold. You volunteered. No, she said. You counted on my guilt. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other, 2 veterans of different kinds of wars. Finally, Keller looked away. You're dismissed. She laughed once. You don't get to dismiss ghosts, director. She walked out before he could answer. Outside, the desert wind greeted her again. It smelled the same: dust, oil, unfinished stories. She stood by the runway, watching the horizon bleed orange. Harper joined her quietly. His arm was in a sling. You saved my people, he said. They saved themselves. He shook his head. You talk like it doesn't matter. It matters, she said softly. That's why it hurts. He studied her face, trying to read the years behind it. Why'd you come back? To make sure none of you became me. He smiled sadly. Too late for that. That night, she found an old email from Harlan in her archive, dated 2 days before his resignation became public. If they call you again, remember, they don't need heroes, they need witnesses. Choose what you'll be. She read it twice, then deleted it. But the words stayed. 3 weeks later, she got another message. Unmarked envelope. Inside, a single photograph, grainy, infrared. A storage facility. And the logo again. Iron Raptor. They weren't finished. On the back, a line written in block letters. They're moving the program underground. Europe next. No signature. Just a code she recognized. C-74. Coal. She exhaled slowly. So the old soldier hadn't retired after all. Neither, it seemed, had she. She packed light, rifle, passport, nothing sentimental. As she zipped the duffel, her eyes fell on the notebook by the bed. The last page she'd written, Dignity Doesn't Speak. She tore it out, folded it, and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Then she turned off the lights. At the airport, dawn broke over the runway. A cargo plane waited, no markings, no flight manifest. She climbed the ramp, each step echoing like a heartbeat. A crew chief handed her a headset. Long flight, ma'am, you sure about this? She glanced out toward the horizon. No, she said, but some debts travel. The engines roared to life. She sat near the rear, staring at the sky through the open hatch. Clouds swallowed the light. In the reflection on the bulkhead glass, she barely recognized herself. Not Iron Widow. Not even Evelyn Shaw. just a soldier chasing the end of something that never ends. She whispered to the empty air, "If there's a next war, let it be for truth, not orders." Then she closed her eyes and let the plane carry her forward. Why did the past always know where to find her? Berlin in winter was a city of ghosts. Cold streets, gray skis, faces that never met your eyes for long. Evelyn stepped from the taxi into a drizzle that felt more like memory than weather. The driver said nothing, but his glance in the mirror told her he knew she wasn't here for tourism. She walked through the narrow alleys near Alexanderplatz until she saw the signal, a chalk mark on the edge of a lamppost, half erased by rain. Old habits. She followed. The cafe was small, quiet, almost too ordinary. The kind of place where no one ever looked twice. Cole sat in the corner, one arm still in that sling, a newspaper shielding his face. He looked up as she approached. "You're late." "I had to make sure I wasn't followed." He smiled. "You were, I took care of it." She sat across from him, iron raptor. He nodded toward the newspaper. Inside it, folded between pages, were photographs, satellite images, storage layouts, personnel rosters. "They're calling it Project Ecoline," he said. "Same tech from Kandahar, only now they've built an AI command layer, drones that choose their own targets." Her jaw tightened. "Who's funding it?" "That's the good part," he said bitterly. "Our own money, shell companies linked to defense contracts. Someone upstairs wants plausible deniability." Evelyn felt the old cold return to her chest, the one that came before every betrayal. "You traced it." He slid her a name on a note card, S. Rains. She stared. Rains again. Turns out retirement doesn't mean silence. He's been consulting for Iron Raptor's European wing. She remembered his face, the man who once handed her the drive with shaking hands, claiming remorse. Now he was feeding the same fire. Cole leaned closer. "We hit their logistics site tonight. We pulled data, proof, anything that ties Rains back to command." "What's the extraction?" He smirked, "Same as always, loud if necessary." She exhaled slowly. "We're not soldiers anymore, Cole." He looked at her. "Then what are we?" She didn't answer. Night fell heavy over the industrial outskirts. Rain slicked the rooftops, reflecting sodium lights like fractured glass. They moved through shadows, two silhouettes among many. Cole's limp slowed them, but his aim hadn't lost its precision. Evelyn scanned the perimeter, drones perched like vultures on antenna masts, their lenses glowing faint red. "Pattern sweep every 30 seconds, she whispered. "Copy." They waited for the rotation, then slipped inside through a maintenance hatch. The warehouse was a cathedral of machines, rows of drones suspended from ceiling mounts, their sleek bodies humming faintly. Somewhere above, a server farm blinked with steady light, feeding data through encrypted channels. Cole set up the uplink drive, 2 minutes to download. Evelyn stood guard, rifle raised, breathing slow. The hum of electronics reminded her of the helicopter rotors from Kandahar, constant, mechanical, almost human in their rhythm. Then a voice echoed from the mezzanine. "Drop the weapon, widow." She spun, rifle trained on the silhouette at the railing. "Rains." He stepped into the light, hands spread as if that made him harmless. "I should have known you couldn't resist cleaning up old sins," he said. Cole muttered, "Guess you're one of them now." Rains chuckled. "Always was, you just never noticed." Evelyn's finger tightened on the trigger. "You killed good people for this." "I followed orders," he said, "just like you did." She took a step closer. "No, I chose mine." He looked at her almost kindly. "And that's why they'll erase you again. You think Keller didn't send you here to tie loose ends. He needed someone expendable, the legend's perfect cover." Cole froze. "He's lying." "Maybe," Rains said. "Maybe not. Ask yourself why the coordinates you got came from an encrypted DIA line. Evelyn's mind raced. Keller's offer, the lack of oversight, the unmarked plane, it fit too neatly. She lowered the rifle an inch, uncertainty flickering, and that's when Rains drew. Cole shouted. Gunfire tore through the warehouse, ricocheting off steel. Evelyn dropped behind a crate, sighted upward, one shot precise. Rains stumbled, weapon clattering from his hand. But before she could move, alarms shrieked. The drones hanging above them came to life, engines whining, rotors spinning. Cole yanked the drive free. Got it. Then move. They sprinted through a hail of bullets as the drones opened fire, muzzle flashes lighting the rain inside. She dove through the side door, rolled onto wet concrete. Cole followed, clutching his arm where blood darkened the sleeve. A black SUV screeched around the corner, Keller's men. DIA insignia. She aimed, don't you dare. The driver's window rolled down. Keller himself stared out, calm as ever. Get in, Shaw, now. Cole hissed, told you. Evelyn's voice was a growl. You used us. I kept you alive, Keller said, for now. Behind them, the warehouse erupted in flame as the drones self-destructed. He gestured again. Drive, all that matters. Get in or you'll die for nothing. She looked at Cole. He nodded once. We play along for now. They climbed in. The ride was silent. Keller typed on his tablet, face lit by its cold glow. Finally she said, Rains worked for you. He didn't deny it, until he stopped following orders. Cole scoffed, that's rich coming from you. Keller ignored him. He went freelance, tried to sell the Echoline algorithm. We couldn't risk exposure. You sent me to clean up your mess, Evelyn said. I sent you because you could survive it, Keller replied, and because you still believe survival means something. She leaned closer. You're building them again, aren't you? Keller's silence was answer enough. Cole shifted in his seat. Why? You've seen what this tech does. Because deterrence works, Keller said coldly. Fear keeps peace better than faith. Evelyn stared out the window, Berlin lights flickering by, reflections like ghosts sliding across her face. You sound like Harlan, she said. Keller's jaw tightened. Harlan hesitated. I don't. They stopped at a safe house near the river. Inside, Keller ordered medics for Cole and locked the drive in a steel case. Evelyn followed him to the balcony, overlooking the spree. Rain whispered against the railings. You think you've done something noble, she said. You haven't. He smiled faintly. You always see things in absolutes, Shaw, heroes and ghosts. The rest of us live in between. She turned to him. You buried my team for hardware, then you built more. Don't talk to me about gray. He studied her quietly. You could help shape this, keep it moral, contained. She laughed bitterly. You want me to bless the next war. I want you to keep it human, he said, because if you walk away again, someone worse fills the void. He left her standing there. For a long time, she just watched the water. Her reflection shimmered, fractured, fatting. Was she keeping the world safe, or feeding the same machine that took everything from her? Cole limped out to join her. You good? She shook her head. We're not done. He handed her a small flash drive. Backup of the data before Keller locked it. Includes command logs, his included. Her eyes met his. You stole from him. Old habits. She smiled. You're a terrible patient. Yeah, he said. So what's the plan? She pocketed the drive. We make the truth louder than their orders. The next day, Keller's convoy left for Brussels, supposed NATO coordination meeting. Evelyn watched from a rooftop as they departed. Rain again, always rain. Cole's voice crackled over the comm. You sure about this? No, she said, but some debts collect interest. They tailed the convoy through the city, weaving between traffic until it stopped at a government compound. Keller stepped out, briefcase in hand. Evelyn's scope settled on him, steady, centered. She could end it now. One breath, one trigger pull. But then she saw his reflection in the glass doors, not arrogance, but exhaustion. Another ghost trying to justify his war. She lowered the rifle. Cole sounded surprised. "You're letting him walk." "Not walk," she said, "fall." That night, encrypted files flooded the defense press. Proof of Echoline's illegal funding. Audio logs of Keller's directives. Footage from the burning warehouse. No names attached, but enough to light fires in every command office from D.C. to Brussels. By dawn, Keller was under investigation, Rains in custody. Iron Raptor collapsed overnight. Evelyn and Cole watched the news from a cheap motel room. He grinned. "You did it." She shook her head. "No, we just started the cleanup." He raised a brow. "Then what now?" She looked toward the window, where morning light was breaking through the clouds. "Now," she said softly, "we learn how to live without crosshairs." Cole laughed. "You think we can?" She smiled faintly. "I think we can try." Hours later, she walked alone through the Berlin streets. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of iron and renewal. She felt light for the first time in years, not clean but honest. At a corner newsstand, a headline caught her eye. UN probes rogue drone program. Source claims Iron Widow involved. She chuckled under her breath. Figures. She kept walking until the city noise faded behind her. And when she finally reached the river, she whispered to the current. Some wars end in silence. Others end when the silence breaks. Then she dropped the last bullet from Kandahar into the water and watched it sink, slowly, finally gone. Why does peace always arrive dressed as war? 3 weeks after the leaks, the world was burning again, only this time with words. Newspapers screamed headlines about the Widow files. Anonymous whistleblower, rogue operator, hero, traitor. No one could decide what to call her. And that suited Evelyn just fine. Because for the first time, the truth didn't need a name. It had evidence. She sat on a park bench in Lisbon, a city far from the noise. Tourists passed by, oblivious. The ocean stretched out before her, calm, endless. But she knew calm was just a pause before the next wave. Cole arrived late, as usual. He dropped a folded newspaper beside her. Keller's photo covered half the front page. Former DIA director faces tribunal, claims leak was internal sabotage. "He's fighting it," Cole said. "Of course he is. They'll pin it on someone else. They always do." She looked out at the horizon. They can pin it wherever they want. The world saw what mattered. He studied her face. "You don't look relieved." "Relief for people who get endings," she said. "I just broke the middle." That night, the hotel TV played an emergency broadcast. A convoy of Iron Raptor drones, unfinished units, had gone rogue during transfer in Eastern Europe. Autonomous, no operator. 12 civilian casualties. Cole muted the screen. "You think it's Keller's cleanup crew?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, this feels like someone trying to prove his point." "Which was?" "That fear keeps peace." He rubbed his temples. "So what do we do now?" She didn't answer immediately. Because she already knew the answer. They had to find whoever picked up Keller's torch before the fire spread again. 2 days later, she was in Warsaw under another alias. The world still whispered Iron Widow, but no one had seen her since the leaks. That's how she liked it, half myth, half rumor. She met an old contact, Captain Novak, once Special Forces, now working private intel. He slid a dossier across the table. "Whoever controls the rogue drones is ex-Iron Raptor," he said, "a faction that broke off when Keller went down. Led by," he hesitated, "a name you won't like, Harper." Evelyn froze. Lieutenant Harper. Novik nodded. You trained him. Looks like he didn't stop learning. She left Warsaw that night. Cole tried to stop her. Eve, you can't chase every ghost. He's not your responsibility. He was my student, she said. That makes him exactly my responsibility. He sighed. Then at least let me come. You can't keep up with me anymore. He smiled sadly. I was hoping you'd say that. They both knew this wasn't stubbornness. It was love, the kind soldiers never say aloud. In the Carpathian Mountains, snow fell like ash. The rogue base sat deep in an abandoned radar facility. From a distance it looked dead, but through her scope Evelyn saw heat signatures, 23 maybe more. She moved alone through the forest, her breath white in the cold. Every step felt like déjà vu, the crawl toward another ridge, another betrayal. When she finally reached the perimeter, she saw him. Harper. He was older now, hardened. No rank on his sleeve, just conviction in his eyes. She raised her rifle. Don't, he said, not turning. You taught me better than that. How long have you known I was coming? Long enough to wonder if you'd pull the trigger. Why, Harper, you had a life, you could have walked away. He turned then. Walked away from what? Watching them bury the truth again. You handed them the matches, I just lit the fire. She took a step closer. You're killing civilians. They're collateral, he said, and the words hit her like a slap. You sound like Keller. He smiled faintly. Maybe Keller was right. Maybe fear is the only peace people understand. Her hands tightened on the rifle. You think making them afraid fixes anything. It reminds them who's holding the trigger. He gestured toward the facility. I've taken their system and freed it. No more command, no more oversight. Machines that can't be bought. Machines that can't be stopped, she said. That's the point. She shook her head. You think this is justice, but it's just another version of control. You didn't free anything. You just changed who's holding the leash. He laughed softly. Maybe, but this time the leash bites back. She lowered the rifle, took a slow breath. You still have a choice. His voice softened. So do you. Then alarm screamed. Cole's voice crackled in her earpiece. Widow, hostiles inbound. He's calling reinforcements. She moved fast, ducking behind a snowbank as bullets tore through the trees. Harper disappeared into the facility. Cole, how many? Too many, pull out. Not until I end this. Inside, the corridors were lit by red emergency lights. The hum of drone engines filled the air, dozens of them, hanging like hornets ready to swarm. Harper stood at the control hub, hands flying over the console. You can't stop it, he shouted. They're online. Evelyn fired a warning shot. Step away. You'd kill me for this. I'd save you if you let me. He turned, eyes fierce. You can't save me, widow. You taught me to survive, not to forgive. He hit the command key. The screens filled with flight paths, targets lighting up across Europe. She lunged, slamming him back from the console. They crashed against the metal floor, struggling. He was stronger, but she was meaner. One quick motion. She pulled his sidearm, pointed it at the control unit. Don't, he gasped. You'll destroy the core. Exactly. She fired. The explosion was deafening, electric arcs tearing through the room. Drones fell like dying stars, their lights winking out one by one. Harper staggered to his knees, coughing. You think this changes anything? Someone else will build it again. She holstered the gun. Then I'll keep breaking it. He smiled weakly. That's not living, Eve, that's punishment. She hesitated. Maybe I deserve it. He slumped against the console, blood on his lip. Then we're both already ghosts. She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist. Tell them I tried. She nodded, I will. By the time she stepped outside, the facility was burning. Cole's jeep screeched to a halt nearby. He jumped out, relief flooding his face. "You're alive." "Barely." He looked at the smoke rising over the ridge. "Harper." "Gone." They stood there in silence, the snow melting in the heat. Cole finally said, "You saved a lot of people tonight." Evelyn shook her head. "I saved them from one version of the same lie." He smiled sadly. "Then maybe that's enough for one lifetime." Days later, back in Lisbon, she sat by the sea again. The waves were calm. The world for the moment was quiet. She opened her notebook to a blank page. The pen felt heavy. Every generation fights the same war. Some with guns, some with truth, some with silence. She paused, then added, "But the hardest battle is forgiving yourself for surviving." She closed the book and looked toward the horizon. Cole approached from behind, 2 coffees in hand. "Still writing your sermons?" he teased. She smiled faintly. "Just notes for whoever comes next." He sat beside her, watching the water. "What if no one does? Then I'll stop one more war myself." He laughed softly. "You'd probably manage." The tide rolled in, brushing the sand, erasing footprints before they could deepen. Evelyn watched it quietly and said, almost to herself, "Legends never die. They just wait until someone needs them again." Cole looked at her, "And if no one does?" She met his eyes. "Then maybe that's peace." That night she dreamed of Kandahar again, only this time the valley wasn't burning. Her team was there alive, faces clear in the sunrise. No gunfire, no orders. Just silence. Just peace. When she woke, tears lined her cheeks, but she was smiling. Because for once, the ghosts had nothing left to say. Why do endings never feel like endings? Because the heart doesn't hear the word enough until the echo fades. Dawn broke over Lisbon like a promise she wasn't sure she believed in. Evelyn stood on the pier again, the same place she had first watched the tide crawl across the sand months ago. The sea was calm, but the world beyond it was restless. Politicians arguing on screens, analysts dissecting what the Iron Widow leak meant for global security. For her, it meant quiet. And quiet finally didn't hurt. Cole had left 2 days earlier. He'd taken a teaching job in Madrid, training recruits who still thought war was glory. He'd hugged her once, awkward and warm, and said, "Try living just once." She hadn't answered. Living had never been her specialty. But she was trying. She rented a small apartment overlooking the harbor. Mornings were slow. Coffee, letters she never sent. Sometimes she went to the local shooting range, not to prove anything, just to feel the rhythm of her breath again. The owner, a retired sergeant from the Portuguese Navy, never asked questions. He only nodded when she walked in and kept the line open, even when she never fired a single shot. At night she listened to the radio. Stories about reform, treaties, words that sounded like hope. Yet underneath, she could still hear the hum of the machine, the one that never stopped building new versions of the same mistake. And she knew someone, somewhere, was already designing the next Ecoline. One evening, as orange light spilled through the window, she found a message slipped under her door. No address, just 3 words written in a hand she recognized. "They're asking again." She sat on the floor for a long time, the paper crumpled between her fingers. The world always asked, because it always forgot. She could go back. She could fight again. She could spend another decade chasing the shape of justice. But for what? So that someone else could forget tomorrow. She looked at the cracked helmet on her shelf, the one she'd kept since Kandahar. Its edges were dull now, its paint faded by time. The name Iron Widow barely visible. She whispered, "You've done enough." That night a storm rolled in off the Atlantic. Wind rattled the windows, thunder stitched the sky. She lit a single candle and opened her old field journal, the one that had followed her through every deployment. Most of the pages were filled with reports, coordinates, kill counts. She turned to the last blank sheet. The mission is over. Not because the war is won, but because the soul deserves a ceasefire. Courage isn't dying for something. It's deciding to keep living after. She set the pen down and closed the cover for the final time. Morning came clear and blue, as if the storm had washed the city clean. She took the ferry across the bay, a small bag slung over her shoulder. Inside, the journal, a photograph of her team, and a folded letter addressed simply to whoever finds this. The deck was almost empty. A child leaned against the railing, pointing at gulls gliding low over the waves. Evelyn smiled. The sound of laughter used to feel foreign, now it felt like oxygen. When the ferry docked, she stepped into the sunlight and began walking with no destination. For the first time, there was no mission waiting, no briefing in her head. Just the hum of the city, alive in a way she had forgotten how to be. That evening, she visited a veterans' shelter on the outskirts, a quiet building painted in fading white. The manager, a soft-spoken woman named Amara, recognized her immediately. Not by fame, but by the look in her eyes. "You've seen too much," Amara said gently. "You want to help?" Evelyn nodded. At first she fixed leaks, cleaned weapons displays, taught basic range safety. Then she started leading therapy sessions for young soldiers trying to come back from their own ghosts. She never told them her story. They didn't need to know. They just needed someone who could listen without judgment. Some nights she sat outside after sessions, watching the lanterns flicker in the courtyard. One of the rookies, a girl barely 20, asked her once, "Were you ever scared?" Evelyn smiled, "Always." "How did you stop it?" "I didn't," she said. "I just learned to walk with it." The girl nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Months passed. The papers stopped mentioning her name. The world moved on again, as it always did. But small changes began to ripple. A new oversight council for autonomous weapons. An amendment requiring human command presence in every operation. And a training manual quietly distributed to recruits titled the Widow Protocol. She never read it, but someone showed her the last page once. It said, "If you must fight, fight with conscience. If you must choose, choose mercy." She closed the book and smiled. Some words survive better when you never claim them. One autumn afternoon, Cole visited. He looked older, grayer, slower, but still carried that spark of humor that had saved her life a dozen times. They walked along the pier as the wind picked up. "So this is what peace looks like," he said. "Boring, isn't it? I could get used to boring." He paused, watching waves break against the rocks. "You ever miss it, the field?" She thought about it. "Sometimes, then I remember what it cost." He nodded. "You know, those kids at the shelter, they talk about you like you're some kind of myth." "I'm not a myth," she said, "just a reminder." Cole smiled, "A good one." She looked at him. "You think we did enough?" "For one lifetime, more than enough." They stood in silence, listening to gulls cry over the water. For once, neither needed to say goodbye. That night, Evelyn walked back to her apartment and opened the window. The sea breeze carried salt and faint music from the harbor below. She closed her eyes and breathed it in. She could still feel every life she'd touched, the one she saved, the one she couldn't. But the weight no longer crushed her. It anchored her. She whispered to the wind, "You can rest now, all of you." In another part of the world, a group of cadets watched a training video about ethics in combat. A voiceover spoke softly over archival footage, grainy clips of a woman walking through a sandstorm. The narrator said, History remembers those who win. Humanity remembers those who endure. None of them knew her name. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Back in Lisbon, Evelyn stood one last time on the pier at dawn. The horizon glowed gold, the sea endless and forgiving. She pulled the letter from her pocket and read it quietly to herself before releasing it into the wind. The paper fluttered once, then disappeared into the light. If you find this, know that peace isn't a place you reach. It's a choice you remake every morning. I'm not Iron Widow anymore. I'm just Evelyn Shaw. And that's enough. She turned from the water, her silhouette outlined against the rising sun. Each step away from the shore felt lighter, freer. For the first time, she wasn't walking toward a mission. She was walking toward life. The wind rose behind her, carrying the faint echo of a voice she once knew, steady, calm, eternal. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And this time she smiled, because she finally understood.